The Intersolar Academy of Advanced Studies occupied a space station the size of a small moon, which was fitting considering it had the collective ego to match. For 3,000 cycles, it had been the premier educational institution in the known galaxy, accepting only the brightest minds from civilized worlds. The key word here being civilized, a designation that required, among other things, that your planet not actively try to kill you on a daily basis. The Academy's admissions board had developed an intricate classification system over the millennia, ranking species and their homeworlds on a scale of 1 to 12. Class 1 worlds were paradises where the most dangerous thing you might encounter was a particularly stern-looking flower. Class 12 worlds were what polite society referred to as Deathworlds, and what everyone else called nightmare planets that should be avoided at all costs. Naturally, this meant that students from lower-class worlds received extra accommodations, protective equipment, and a curriculum adjusted for their delicate constitutions. It was all very progressive and inclusive, assuming you ignored the thinly veiled condescension baked into every safety protocol. The station itself was a marvel of engineering and cross-species cooperation. Environmental zones shifted seamlessly from methane-rich atmospheres to aquatic chambers to crystalline meditation halls. Gravity plating allowed for everything from 0.3 standard G to triple standard, though most academic zones defaulted to 0.8 for the comfort of the majority. The architecture somehow managed to be both breathtaking and slightly pretentious, with soaring transparent aluminum walls that offered views of the nebula beyond, as if to constantly remind students that they were studying among the stars. On this particular rotation, a new student was navigating the registration queue in the main administrative hub. The human, because yes, that's what she was, though nobody had quite figured that out yet, stood patiently behind a quaternion, whose gelatinous form kept sliding slightly out of the designated waiting area. The registration officer, a Vexillian with too many eye stalks and not enough patience, was processing forms with the enthusiasm of someone who had seen this exact routine for the past 200 cycles. The problem, if you could call it that, was a beautiful mess of bureaucratic incompetence. Humans had only recently achieved interstellar capability, and their application to join the greater galactic community was still bouncing between committees like a plasma ball in a superconductor. Someone in the processing department had looked at the preliminary reports on Earth, saw the words stable atmosphere, abundant water, and diverse ecosystem, and promptly classified it as a Class 7 world. Moderately challenging, but nothing a sensible species couldn't handle with proper planning. They had somehow missed the parts about the predators, the weather patterns, the tectonic activity, the radiation from space that the atmosphere only partially blocked, the diseases, the plants that evolved chemical warfare, and the general fact that everything on Earth had decided that violence was always an option. To be fair, the report had been 17,000 pages long, and the intern who skimmed it had been working a double shift. So here stood Kira Vasquez, human from Earth, classified as a fragile Class 7 species, about to receive accommodations meant for beings who considered a light breeze to be a natural disaster. Next, the Vexillian droned, not looking up from its datapad. Kira stepped forward, her movements easy and relaxed in the 0.8 gravity that was supposed to be standard. For her, it felt like walking on a trampoline, but she'd learned quickly not to bounce too obviously. "Name and world of origin," the officer said, eye stalks finally swiveling to acknowledge her presence. "Kira Vasquez. Terra, also cataloged as Earth in some databases. Processing." The officer's claws clicked against the datapad. "Ah, yes. Class 7 designation. You'll need to review the safety protocols for your classification, The gravity in standard zones may feel heavy for you, so we've arranged for personal inertia compensation. That won't be necessary, Kira said. It's Academy policy, the officer replied, in a tone that suggested this was not a negotiation. Class 7 species receive full environmental support. You'll also have access to enhanced medical facilities, structural support equipment for high-gravity zones, and dietary accommodation for your specific nutritional requirements. Kira opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. She'd been briefed extensively before arriving. Play it safe, the Earth Diplomatic Corps had told her. Don't rock the boat. Let them think we're delicate. It makes them comfortable. The subtext, of course, was that nobody wanted to give the galactic community a reason to classify humans as a threat before they'd even secured membership. Sure, she said finally. Whatever you think is best. The officer handed her a data chip containing her schedule, room assignment, and approximately 800 pages of safety guidelines. Orientation begins next cycle. Try not to strain yourself getting there. Kira took the chip and managed not to roll her eyes. This was going to be a long semester. The first day of orientation would have gone smoothly if the universe had any sense of restraint, which it demonstrably did not. Kira's assigned quarters were in the Class 4 through Class 7 residential sector, a sprawling complex designed with enough safety features to protect a newborn from a hostile takeover. The doors were reinforced. The environmental controls had 17 redundancies. There were emergency oxygen supplies in every room, despite the fact that the station's life support had not failed once in 3,000 cycles. Her roommate was a Palaxi named Zixtara, a bipedal being covered in iridescent feathers who looked like someone had crossbred a bird with anxiety itself. Zixtara's homeworld was a Class 5, which meant it had weather patterns and occasionally challenging terrain, both of which apparently qualified as serious threats requiring constant vigilance. "Oh good, you're here," Zixtara said, feathers ruffling with what Kira was learning to recognize as Palaxi nervousness. "I was reviewing the orientation schedule, and there's a mandatory assembly in the Grand Hall. We should leave early. I've calculated 17 different routes and their associated risk factors. It's just a walk across campus," Kira said, dropping her bag on her assigned sleeping platform. "Just a walk?" Zixtara's feathers stood on end. "Do you know how many species will be in those corridors? The potential for accidental contact, the varying atmospheric requirements creating pressure differentials, the—" "I'm sure we'll be fine," Kira said, though she was beginning to understand that fine was a relative concept here. The Grand Hall was impressive, she had to admit. It could hold 10,000 beings comfortably, with environmental zones that shifted in real time to accommodate whoever was standing in that particular spot. The air around Kira was oxygen-nitrogen mix at standard pressure. 2 meters away, a methane breather stood in its own atmospheric bubble. The technology was seamless and probably cost more than Earth's entire GDP. The orientation lecture was delivered by Dean Corvanix, a Xanthorian whose species had been spacefaring for longer than humans had been using fire. They stood on a floating platform, their crystalline form refracting light in ways that were probably meant to be impressive. "Welcome to the Intersolar Academy," Corvanix began, their voice resonating through the translation matrix embedded in every student's neural interface. "You represent 417 species from across known space. Here, you will push the boundaries of knowledge, challenge your understanding of the universe, and learn to cooperate across the vast diversity of intelligent life." It was a good speech, Kira thought. Inspiring even? It might have been more inspiring if it didn't come with the underlying assumption that most of the students in the room needed to be handled with protective gloves. Following this assembly, you will proceed to the Fitness Assessment Center for mandatory physical evaluations. This is not a competition, Korvanik stressed, which immediately made it a competition. This is simply to establish baseline capabilities and ensure appropriate accommodations for all species. Kira felt a small knot of concern forming. Physical evaluation. Right. This was where things might get complicated. The Fitness Assessment Center was a cathedral to cross-species athletic capability, which was a fancy way of saying it was a gymnasium with delusions of grandeur. Different zones offered different gravity levels, atmospheric conditions, and terrain types. There were pools for aquatic species, climbing structures for arboreal beings, and what looked suspiciously like a zero-G obstacle course suspended near the ceiling. Kira was directed to Zone 7, the standard gravity area designated for Class 5 through Class 8 species. The assessment administrator was a Krillian, insectoid and efficient, with compound eyes that gave the impression they were judging you from 17 different angles simultaneously. Vasquez, Kira, human, Class 7. The administrator read from their datapad. You'll be using the assisted equipment. Assisted? Kira asked. Exoskeletal support for the strength tests, inertia dampening for the agility course, respiratory assistance for the endurance evaluation. The administrator gestured to a rack of equipment that looked like it had been designed for someone recuperating from major surgery. Standard procedure for your classification. What if I don't use the assisted equipment? Kira asked carefully. The administrator's antennae twitched in what might have been amusement. Then you will likely injure yourself, and the academy will be liable. Put on the equipment. Kira looked at the exoskeleton, then at the other students in her assessment group. There was a Volthani, reptilian and muscular, stretching in preparation. A Quellan, vaguely humanoid with disproportionately long limbs, was testing the grip strength machine with obvious confidence. They were all using standard equipment. She made a decision that the Earth Diplomatic Corps would probably regret. I'll try without it first. If I struggle, I'll use the support equipment. The administrator's antennae twitched again, this time definitely in amusement. Your funeral. We'll start with grip strength. The machine was simple enough. Squeeze the handles. It measures the force. The display showed the average ranges for different species classifications. Class 7 species averaged between 40 and 90 units. Class 5 species, like the Volthani currently stepping up, typically hit between 120 and 200. The Volthani grabbed the handles and squeezed, muscles rippling under their scaled skin. The display climbed steadily. 100 units, 150, 190, holding at 195. Respectable. The Volthani released with a satisfied hiss. Next, the administrator called. Kira stepped up to the machine. The handles felt odd in her grip, slightly too large, designed for the average of multiple species rather than optimized for anyone. She squeezed, not even particularly hard. The display jumped to 100, then 200, then kept climbing. 250, 300, 320 before she eased off, not because she'd reached her limit, but because the handles had started to deform slightly, and that seemed bad. The gymnasium went very quiet. Equipment malfunction, the administrator said after a moment, making a note on their data pad. We'll recalibrate and retest later. Except the equipment wasn't malfunctioning, which became apparent when Kira proceeded through the rest of the assessments. The agility course that was supposed to challenge Class 7 species felt like she was running in slow motion. The endurance test, a monitored run on a track with adjustable resistance, ended with her asking if it was going to get harder, while the Krillian administrators stared at readouts that made no sense. The vertical jump measurement had to be recalibrated twice because Kira kept hitting the ceiling. Literally. The 0.8 gravity combined with human leg strength meant she had to consciously hold back to avoid concussing herself on the overhead panels. By the end of the assessment, a small crowd of administrators had gathered. Eye stalks and optical sensors and various other sensory organs, all focused on the human who was supposed to be fragile. There's clearly something wrong with the equipment in this zone, the head administrator, a Vexillian named Tor Mix, declared. We'll schedule a full maintenance review. Kira, who had just deadlifted a weight sled that was apparently meant for Class 3 species, wisely said nothing. The Earth Diplomatic Corps could thank her later. Word spread through the student body the way rumors always do. Quickly, inaccurately, and with increasing embellishment. By the next cycle, stories were circulating about the new student who had broken every machine in the fitness center, who could jump 20 meters straight up, who had accidentally crushed a grip strength handle into scrap metal. Most students dismissed it as obvious exaggeration. Some were curious, and a few, like Ven Corvallis, a Thexian biochemistry major with a suspicious mind and too much free time, decided to investigate. The chemistry lab was where things got interesting, which in an academic setting usually meant mildly dangerous or potentially explosive, occasionally both. Professor Jixnall was a Quellan who had been teaching introductory toxicology for longer than most species had been aware of chemistry as a concept. They had a particular fondness for beginning each semester with what they called the demonstration, which was really just an excuse to scare new students into respecting laboratory safety protocols. Toxins, Jixnall announced, their long fingers dancing across the holographic display, showing molecular structures, are substances that cause harm to biological systems. What constitutes a toxin, however, is entirely species-dependent. What is harmless to one species may be instantly lethal to another. They pulled up a display showing a simple alkaloid molecule. This is theobromine. For species like the Xanthorians or Palaxians, even trace amounts can cause cardiac arrest. For others, like the Krillians, it's mildly toxic but survivable in small doses. Kira, sitting at her lab station next to Zixtara, recognized the molecule. She kept her expression neutral. For a Class 7 species like our human student, Jixnall continued, and Kira felt every eye in the room turn toward her. This would be extremely dangerous. Humans have relatively sensitive biochemistry, which is why their world classification reflects moderate environmental challenges. Kira raised her hand slowly. Yes, Vasquez? Actually, Professor, humans consume theobromine regularly. It's in chocolate. We eat it for pleasure. The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for shocking revelations or particularly bad puns. I'm sorry, Jixnall said slowly. You eat it? For pleasure? Well, yes. It's derived from cacao beans. Most humans consume it several times a week, some daily. There are entire industries built around it. Professor Jixnall's long fingers twitched in what Kira was learning to recognize as Quellan confusion. That should be. Let me verify this. They pulled up Earth's biochemical database, which Kira noticed was surprisingly incomplete. This cannot be correct. The dosages listed here would be fatal to most Class 7 species. Humans metabolize it differently, Kira said, trying to be helpful. Theobromine is actually quite dangerous for Earth canines, but humans process it efficiently. It's a mild stimulant for us. A stimulant. Jixnall repeated the word like they were testing its validity. You consume toxins as stimulants. Oh, that's not even the best one, Kira said, warming to the topic. Caffeine is our primary cognitive enhancer. Most adult humans consume it daily, often in doses that would probably hospitalize half the species in this room. Ben Corvallis, the Thexian who had been investigating the fitness center rumors, leaned forward at his station. What else do humans consume that would be toxic to other species? Kira thought for a moment. Capsaicin. We breed plants specifically to produce higher concentrations of it and then eat them competitively. Ethanol, which we ferment deliberately and drink socially despite it being a literal poison. Oxalic acid in spinach and rhubarb. Various mold cultures in cheese. Slightly toxic lectins in beans, which is why we have to cook them properly or risk illness. Oh, and we've domesticated allium species, onions and garlic, which are toxic to many mammals on our own planet, but we put them in almost everything. The laboratory had gone from silent to buzzing with whispered conversations in a dozen different languages. Professor Jixnall was scrolling through Earth's biochemical database with increasing agitation. This is fascinating, Ven said, and there was something calculating in his expression. Tell me, Vasquez, what class would you estimate Earth should actually be classified as? Kira hesitated. This was the question she'd been trying to avoid. I'm not qualified to make that assessment. Humor me. Well, Kira said slowly, Earth has significant predator populations, tectonic activity, extreme weather patterns, high levels of cosmic radiation exposure, hundreds of thousands of toxic plant species, diseases that evolve specifically to exploit human biology, and an atmosphere that's technically corrosive over long timescales due to oxygen concentration. So, maybe not Class 7. What class? Ven pressed. Class 12, Professor Jixnall said quietly, looking up from the database. According to this data, Earth meets every criterion for a Deathworld classification. How was this missed? Kira shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant while internally panicking about the diplomatic incident she was probably causing. Bureaucratic error? An error, Jixnall repeated flatly. The Academy has placed a Deathworld species in accommodations meant for fragile life forms. You've been operating under what fraction of your actual capability? I've been trying not to break anything, Kira admitted. Zix Tara, who had been silent throughout this exchange, made a sound like a tea kettle achieving sentience. You're from a Deathworld. A Deathworld. I've been living with a Deathworlder. I'm very safe, Kira said quickly. Humans are actually quite social. We domesticated predators on our world for companionship. We're not dangerous. You eat poison for fun, Zix Tara countered. Well, yes, but that's different. Professor Jixnall was already composing a message on their datapad, their long fingers moving with frantic speed. I'm contacting the administration. This is a classification emergency. The emergency meeting of the Academy's Administrative Council was held in a secure chamber designed for crisis situations, which seemed appropriate given that everyone was treating this like they'd just discovered a bomb in the cafeteria rather than a simple paperwork error. Dean Corvanix presided over the meeting with all the gravitas of someone who had just realized their institution had made a mistake of truly impressive proportions. The council chamber's holographic displays showed every piece of data they'd managed to compile about Kira Vasquez in the past 6 hours, which was both thorough and vaguely creepy. Let me ensure I understand the situation correctly, Corvanix said, their crystalline form refracting the display light into prismatic patterns. We admitted a student from a Class 12 Deathworld, classified her as Class 7, provided her with safety accommodations she doesn't need, and placed her in standard housing with a Class 5 roommate who is now filing stress compensation claims. That's accurate, confirmed Administrator Tormix, the Vexillian who had overseen the fitness assessments. Additionally, the human has been restraining her physical capabilities to avoid breaking equipment and drawing attention. Every assessment we've conducted has been artificially limited. "Show me the recalibrated fitness data," Corvanix ordered. The holographic display shifted, showing Kira's assessment results next to the projected capabilities based on Deathworld species parameters. The numbers were alarming. In standard 0.8 gravity, a human operating without restraint could generate force comparable to Class 3 species, who came from high-gravity worlds where simply standing upright was a workout. Her endurance metrics suggested she could operate at sustained high activity levels that would exhaust most Class 5 species. "This is not possible," said Council Member Threxala, a Xanthorian whose crystalline form vibrated with agitation. Class 12 species don't achieve interstellar capability. The environmental pressures are too extreme. They remain trapped in survival mode. Apparently, humans are the exception, Tormix said dryly. They achieved spaceflight approximately 0.2 cycles ago. They've developed faster-than-light capability, artificial intelligence, and fusion power, all while living on a planet actively trying to kill them. "That's horrifying," Threxala said. "That's impressive," countered Council Member Vixtara, a Krillian admiral who had served in the defense forces for 3 centuries. "Do you understand what this means? A species that evolved to survive Class 12 conditions, with all the adaptations that implies, and they directed that toward technological development instead of simply not dying. They optimized for intelligence and cooperation on a death world. They consume toxins recreationally," Threxala pointed out. "So do the Volthani, and they're Class 5. Vixtara countered. "The difference is humans do it because they find it pleasant, not because they have specialized biology that makes them immune. They just have robust enough systems to handle it." Dean Corvanix held up a crystalline appendage for silence. "The philosophical implications of human evolution can be debated later. Right now, we have a practical problem. We have a death world species operating under false classification. We need to determine appropriate accommodations and assess whether there are safety concerns." "Safety concerns?" Vixtara's antennae twitched in amusement. "You mean, is she dangerous to other students?" "That is precisely what I mean." "Well," Tormix pulled up another file. "Humans are persistence predators. They evolved to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion, which explains the endurance capabilities. They're also pack hunters with sophisticated social structures, which explains their communication skills and cooperative tendencies. They have binocular vision optimized for tracking movement, redundant organ systems, and a threat response that includes significant adrenaline production that temporarily enhances strength and pain resistance." "So yes, potentially dangerous," Threxala said. "Potentially, but not inherently," Vixtara corrected. "Most species are potentially dangerous. The question is intent and socialization. From what I've seen in the reports, Vasquez has been actively restraining herself to avoid causing problems. That suggests strong social conditioning and awareness of her capabilities relative to others. She also," Tormix added, "has been asking her professors questions during lectures, volunteering for study groups, and generally behaving like a model student who's concerned about her grades. The consensus from faculty is that she's polite, engaged, and slightly bemused by all the safety protocols." Dean Corvanix processed this information, their crystalline structure pulsing with thought. "Recommendations? Reclassify her immediately to Class 12, Tormix said. Update all her accommodations to reflect actual capabilities. Issue a formal apology for the administrative error. And perhaps most importantly, update our assessment procedures so this doesn't happen again. I recommend we also offer her placement in advanced physical courses, Vixtara added. If she's been restraining herself, she's not getting appropriate challenge in standard curriculum. That's a waste of her potential and our resources. Agreed, Korvanik said. Draft the reclassification immediately. I'll speak with Vasquez personally. And someone please reassure her roommate that she's not in danger. The roommate has already requested a transfer, Tormix said. Of course she has. Kira was summoned to the dean's office the following cycle, which she knew couldn't be good. The office was located in the upper administrative levels, where the gravity was set to 0.6 standard, and the atmosphere was carefully balanced for Zenthorian comfort. She felt light as a feather and had to consciously control her movements to avoid bouncing off the walls like an overexcited child. Dean Korvanik's office was exactly what you'd expect from an ancient crystalline being who had seen civilizations rise and fall. Elegant, minimalist, and filled with artifacts that probably cost more than a small starship. The dean themselves stood near the window wall, gazing out at the nebula. Vasquez, Korvanik said without turning. Thank you for coming. Did I have a choice? Not particularly. The dean turned, light refracting through their form. I suppose you're aware of why I've called you here. The reclassification issue, Kira said. Look, I can explain. No explanation necessary. The error was ours, not yours. We've reviewed the initial assessment data and have corrected your classification to Class 12. Your accommodations will be updated accordingly. Kira felt a weight lift that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. So, I'm not in trouble? Why would you be in trouble? You've followed all academy protocols, attended your classes, and by all accounts been an exemplary student. The fact that you were doing so while significantly restraining your capabilities only speaks to your character. My roommate requested a transfer, Kira said quietly. Yes, well, Zixtara is from a Class 5 world where the most dangerous predator is roughly equivalent to what I believe you would call a particularly aggressive rabbit. Learning she's been living with an apex predator from a Deathworld has caused some distress. It's not personal. It feels personal. Korvanix moved closer, and Kira noticed the way light seemed to follow them, bending in ways that shouldn't be possible. I've been dean of this academy for 400 cycles, Vasquez. I've seen thousands of species come through these halls. What I've learned is that difference is uncomfortable. It challenges assumptions. But it's also the foundation of progress. That's a very diplomatic way of saying everyone's scared of me now, Kira said. Some are, Korvanix admitted. But others are curious. Ven Corvallis, the Thexian from your chemistry class, has submitted a proposal to write his thesis on human biochemistry. Professor Jixnall wants to collaborate with Earth scientists on comparative toxicology. And Admiral Vixtara, who sits on our council, mentioned that the Defense Forces would be very interested in human perspectives on survival training. So, I'm a science project now. You're a representative of a species that achieved something remarkable, Korvanix corrected. Most Class 12 species never develop advanced civilization. The environmental pressures are too severe. They remain fragmented, focused on survival. Humans somehow went from persistence hunting on an African savanna to faster-than-light travel in the cosmic blink of an eye. That's extraordinary. Kira considered this. What happens now? Now, you continue your studies with appropriate accommodations. We're reassigning you to quarters designed for higher classification species, more durable furnishings, enhanced structural support, access to high-gravity training facilities. You'll also be offered placement in advanced courses if you're interested. And the other students? We'll adjust, Korvanik said simply. Or they won't. That's their choice. Your responsibility is to be yourself, not to make others comfortable with your existence. It was good advice, Kira thought. She just wasn't sure it would be that simple. The crisis that proved everyone's fears wrong and right simultaneously happened 3 cycles later, during what was supposed to be a routine atmospheric systems maintenance check. The Academy's environmental systems were designed with enough redundancy to survive a direct hit from a small asteroid, which made it cosmically ironic that the failure was caused by something as mundane as a corroded sensor coupling in Section 7's atmospheric regulation hub. The corrosion went undetected because the sensors that would have detected it were part of the corroded coupling, creating a recursive monitoring failure that would have been funny if it hadn't been catastrophic. The result was a cascade failure that vented atmosphere from 3 adjacent sections, triggering emergency bulkheads and trapping approximately 40 students and 2 faculty members in a lecture hall that was rapidly losing breathable air. Kira was in the library when the alarm started, a pleasant space filled with holographic texts and quiet study zones. The emergency announcement came through every speaker simultaneously. Atmospheric breach in Education Section 7. All personnel evacuate adjacent sectors. Emergency response teams deploying. She looked up from her xenobiology text to see other students moving toward exits with varying levels of panic. The library was 4 sections away from the breach, safe, but close enough that you could feel the tension in the air. Except Kira wasn't thinking about safety. She was thinking about the fact that Section 7 included the Advanced Theoretical Physics Lecture Hall, and she knew for a fact that her chemistry lab partner, a Quellan named Rix Tal, had a class there this period. She pulled up the Academy map on her datapad. Section 7. Emergency bulkheads would have sealed automatically, which meant anyone trapped inside was stuck until rescue teams could establish a safe corridor. Standard procedure would take at least 20 minutes, probably longer given the complexity of atmospheric breaches. 20 minutes without breathable air. Most species in the Academy could survive maybe 5 to 10 minutes in oxygen deprivation, depending on their specific biology. Class 7 species, even less. Kira looked at the map, then at the emergency protocols scrolling across her datapad, then made a decision that the Earth Diplomatic Corps would definitely not approve of. She ran, not a jog, not a hurried walk, a full sprint at speeds she'd been carefully restraining since arriving at the Academy. In the 0.8 gravity, she felt like she was flying. Her human muscle and bone structure launched her forward with each stride. Other students barely had time to move aside as she blasted past them, moving faster than most species could track. The corridors blurred. She covered 4 sections in under 2 minutes, ignoring the emergency warnings telling her to evacuate. The bulkhead to Section 7 was sealed, a massive door designed to hold against vacuum. There was an emergency manual override, but it required 2 people to operate because of the forces involved. Kira grabbed both handles, planted her feet, and pulled. The mechanisms protested, safety interlocks engaging. But human evolution had spent millions of years optimizing for exactly this kind of problem, applying maximum force when survival demanded it. The adrenaline response kicked in, that wonderful Deathworld adaptation that temporarily turned humans into slightly better versions of themselves at the cost of long-term physical damage. The bulkhead groaned and began to move. Slowly at first, then faster as she got leverage. 10 centimeters, 20, half a meter, enough to slip through. The lecture hall on the other side was chaos. 40 students from a dozen species, all in various stages of panic. 2 faculty members trying to maintain order while the atmospheric display on the wall showed oxygen levels, dropping into critical ranges. Some species were already unconscious. Others were hyperventilating, which was exactly the wrong response, but understandable. Kira did a quick assessment. The breach was in the environmental coupling 2 sections over. The bulkhead she'd opened led back to safe atmosphere, but it would take time to evacuate everyone, especially the unconscious ones and the species who couldn't move quickly in the low oxygen. She grabbed the nearest student, a small Palaxi who was barely conscious. "Stay with me," she said, then looked around for more. "Anyone who can walk, head toward the bulkhead I opened. Anyone who can carry someone, help the ones who are unconscious. Move." To their credit, most of the students responded immediately. Panic had made them receptive to anyone who sounded like they had a plan. Kira hauled 2 unconscious Quellans onto her shoulders. They were tall, but relatively light in the low gravity, and headed back toward the bulkhead. The professor, a Vexillian named Sarkix, stared at her. "You're the human, Vasquez." "Yeah." "You're carrying 2 full-grown Quellans." "Yeah." "How are you not unconscious from oxygen deprivation?" "Deathworld lungs," Kira said shortly. "We're adapted for high-altitude, low-oxygen environments. This is uncomfortable but not critical yet. Now stop asking questions and help me get everyone out." The evacuation took 6 minutes, which was approximately 14 minutes faster than the emergency response teams had estimated. By the time the official rescue arrived, complete with breathing equipment and medical teams, they found the trapped students and faculty already in the safe corridor, being organized by a human who was breathing hard but otherwise seemed fine. The emergency coordinator, a Krillian named Jexitar, stared at the scene with evident confusion. "How did you breach the bulkhead?" "Those require mechanical assistance to open during emergency lockdown." "I pulled really hard," Kira said, which was technically accurate if massively understated. "That's not possible." "She's from Earth," Professor Sarkix said, still looking slightly dazed. "Class 12. "Ah," Jexitar said, in the tone of someone whose entire worldview had just been recalibrated. "That explains it." The aftermath of the atmospheric breach incident rippled through the academy like a shock wave, though this time the response was notably different from the fitness center incident. This time, there were witnesses, lots of witnesses. 40 students and 2 faculty members who had been saved by the human who wasn't supposed to be physically capable of any of it. The student network, that ever-reliable source of gossip and wildly varying accuracy, exploded with accounts of what happened. Some were accurate. Some claimed Kira had torn the bulkhead off its hinges with her bare hands. One particularly creative account suggested she'd breathed fire to reoxygenate the room, which was physically impossible but made for good storytelling. What couldn't be disputed was that she'd moved faster than safety protocols could deploy, forced open a sealed emergency bulkhead, and evacuated 40 people while experiencing oxygen deprivation that should have rendered her unconscious. Dean Corvanix called her back to the office, which Kira was beginning to think of as her second home at this rate. "You violated approximately 17 safety protocols," Corvanix said without preamble. "Yes," Kira admitted. "You ignored evacuation orders, entered a hazardous zone, and manually overrode emergency systems. Also yes. You saved 43 lives in the process." "I wasn't counting, but that sounds right." The dean was silent for a moment. Light refracting through their crystalline structure and patterns that Kira had learned indicated deep thought. "The council has been debating your presence here since the reclassification." Some members believe that Deathworld species represent an inherent safety risk, that your capabilities make you dangerous. Kira's stomach dropped. Are you expelling me? No, Korvanik said, and something in their tone might have been amusement. I'm giving you a commendation, and possibly creating a new category of emergency response volunteer if you're interested. I'm sorry, what? You did in 6 minutes what would have taken our emergency teams 20 or more. You assessed the situation, made tactical decisions, and executed a rescue with minimal resources and significant personal risk. That's precisely the kind of critical thinking we try to teach here, with the added benefit that you actually succeeded instead of creating a simulation scenario. So, I'm not in trouble. You're in trouble with the Safety Compliance Office, which is going to have 17 different forms for you to fill out explaining your protocol violations. But from an institutional perspective, you've just demonstrated that Deathworld species don't represent a threat to Academy safety. You represent an asset. Kira sat down in the chair across from the dean's desk, suddenly feeling very tired. People are still scared of me. Some are, Korvanik agreed. But more are curious. You've received 43 thank you messages in the past cycle, 14 interview requests from student publications, and 1 marriage proposal from a Volthani who apparently finds rescue scenarios romantic. What? You'll also be pleased to know that Zixtara has withdrawn her transfer request and asked if she could move back in, assuming you're comfortable with that. Really? Really? It turns out that being saved from a potential disaster by your roommate is a bonding experience. Who knew? Kira laughed, surprising herself. This is all very weird. Welcome to Interstellar Academia, Korvanik said dryly. It only gets stranger from here. 3 cycles later, Kira found herself in the Academy cafeteria during peak hours, which was its own form of chaos. Hundreds of species, hundreds of dietary requirements, all trying to navigate a buffet system that probably violated several laws of physics and thermodynamics. She was carrying a tray, loaded with what the system had identified as human-compatible food, grilled protein that might have been chicken in another life, vegetables that were probably vegetables, and a dessert that contained chocolate because apparently someone had updated the database to note that humans considered theobromine a feature rather than a bug. Vasquez, a voice called. She turned to see Ven Corvallis, the Thexian biochemistry student, waving from a table. Come sit with us. The us included Rixtal, her Quellen lab partner who she'd carried out of the lecture hall, 2 other students she vaguely recognized from her xenobiology class, and surprisingly, Zixtara, her Palaxi roommate. Kira navigated through the crowd and sat down, trying not to notice the way conversation at nearby tables quieted slightly when she arrived. So, Ven said immediately, because Thexians apparently didn't believe in small talk, I've been researching human athletic capabilities, and I have questions. The fitness center data suggests humans can sustain high-intensity activity for extended periods. How? Evolution, Kira said, stealing a vegetable from her tray. We're persistence predators. We used to hunt by just chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. That's horrifying, Zixtara said. That's efficient, Ven countered. Most predators on Class 5 or lower worlds are sprint hunters. High speed, low endurance. Humans inverted that. We also sweat, Kira added. Most species here don't, right? Sweating is a really effective cooling mechanism. It lets us keep going when other species would overheat. You leak, Rixtal said. For thermoregulation, that's actually brilliant. It's gross, Zixtara countered. It's both, Kira admitted. But it works. Humans can run down pretty much any animal on Earth, given enough time and water. What about the strength? Another student, a Zenthorian named Kextala, asked. You forced open an emergency bulkhead. Those are designed to resist explosive decompression. Adrenaline response, Kira said. When humans face threats, our bodies release hormones that temporarily enhance strength and suppress pain perception. It's not unlimited. There's physical damage afterwards. But in an emergency, humans can exceed their normal capabilities significantly. And you just evolved this? Kextala sounded skeptical. Every species has stress responses, but not like that. Earth is a Class 12 death world, Kira said simply. Species that didn't develop effective emergency responses didn't survive long enough to reproduce. It's selection pressure at its most basic. The table was quiet for a moment, processing this. I have a question, Zixtara said finally. When you pulled us out of that lecture hall, were you scared? Kira thought about it. Yes. Terrified, actually. I was worried I wouldn't get there in time, that I wouldn't be strong enough to open the bulkhead, that people would die because I wasn't fast enough. But you did it anyway. Fear doesn't mean you don't act, Kira said. It means you're aware of the risk. Humans feel fear like any species. We just have a lot of practice pushing through it, because on Earth, if you let fear paralyze you, something would eat you. I'm beginning to understand why humans achieved spaceflight so quickly, Ben said. You're a species that looks at terrifying situations and decides to try anyway. We call it optimism, Kira said with a slight smile. Or stupidity, depending on the outcome. I think, Rixtal said slowly, that the Academy is better for having humans here. You bring a different perspective, different capabilities. It challenges our assumptions. Some of those assumptions being, don't put Deathworld species in student housing, Zixtara added. That assumption was wrong, Rixtal countered. Kira's been nothing but helpful. She tutored me through quantum mechanics last cycle. She shares her chocolate even though it's technically toxic to most of us. She saved 43 people from an atmospheric breach. Those aren't the actions of a dangerous predator. Those are the actions of someone who cares. Kira felt her eyes sting slightly, which was embarrassing because humans also leaked when they experienced strong emotions, which was arguably even more ridiculous than sweating. Thanks, she managed. Also, Ven added, you're still doing that thing where you carefully control your movements so you don't accidentally break something or move too fast. You can stop that. We know what you're capable of now. You don't have to hide it. Kira laughed. I'm not sure the furniture is rated for full human capability. Then we'll get better furniture, Zixtara said firmly. You're our friend, and friends accept each other, even if one of them is from a nightmare planet and can apparently run forever and lift incredible weight and survive on poison. When you put it that way, it does sound weird, Kira admitted. Everything about this situation is weird, Ven said cheerfully. But that's what makes it interesting. Now, about those human endurance capabilities. Would you be willing to participate in some completely ethical and not at all invasive research studies? Kira grinned. Define not at all invasive. Well, the conversation dissolved into laughter and debate. And Kira realized that somewhere between the fitness center incident and the atmospheric breach rescue, something had shifted. She was no longer the fragile Class 7 student who needed protection. She wasn't even the scary Deathworld predator that everyone needed to avoid. She was just Kira, a student at the Intersolar Academy, Someone who happened to be really good at running and lifting things and surviving in low oxygen environments because her planet had spent millions of years optimizing humans for survival. And apparently, that was okay. The semester continued with significantly less drama than those first few chaotic cycles, though Kira's presence had permanently altered certain aspects of Academy life. The fitness center recalibrated all their equipment and added a new Class 12 difficulty setting that exactly 0 species other than humans could use. Professor Jixnall restructured their entire toxicology curriculum to include comparative studies on human biochemistry, which became one of the most popular electives in the science division. The emergency response protocols were updated to include a note that Deathworld species might be valuable assets during crisis situations, which Kira suspected was a polite way of saying, if something goes wrong, find the human. More importantly, at least to Kira, was the shift in how other students interacted with her. The initial fear had faded into something more nuanced, respect mixed with curiosity, and in some cases, genuine friendship. She joined study groups, participated in campus activities, and even agreed to demonstrate human athletic capabilities during an interspecies cultural exchange event, which resulted in her accidentally setting 3 new Academy records and giving the track and field coach existential concerns about competitive fairness. Dean Corvanix called her in one final time before the end of semester break, which Kira attended with significantly less anxiety than previous summons. I wanted to give you this personally, Corvanix said, handing her a data chip. Your grades. You've achieved top marks in every subject, except advanced quantum theory, where you achieved second highest marks. The highest went to a Xanthorian who has been studying quantum mechanics for longer than your species has had written language, so I think you can forgive yourself that one. Kira took the chip, surprised. I wasn't sure how I'd done with all the chaos this semester. The chaos was largely administrative and not your fault, Corvanix said. Your academic performance has been exemplary. Your social integration, after initial complications, has been remarkable. And your contributions to Academy safety procedures have been valuable. All things considered, I would say your first semester has been a success. Even with the whole Deathworld classification thing? Especially because of that, Corvanix said. You've challenged our assumptions about what constitutes appropriate educational environments. You've demonstrated that danger and threat are not synonymous. And you've shown that diversity, real diversity, including the uncomfortable kind, makes institutions stronger. That's very philosophical, Kira said. I'm very old, Corvanix replied. Philosophy comes with the territory. Do you plan to return next semester? Absolutely, Kira said without hesitation. I've got 3 more cycles until I finish my xenobiology degree, and Ven has promised to let me help with his thesis research on comparative biochemistry. Good, Corvanix said, and there was definite warmth in their tone. The Academy is better with you here, even if you do occasionally give the Safety Compliance Office panic attacks. Kira left the dean's office and headed back toward her quarters, moving through corridors that had become familiar over the past semester. She nodded to students she recognized, careful to moderate her strength when she high-fived a Volthani who had aced their engineering final, mindful of her speed when she jogged past a group of slower-moving Palaxians. But she wasn't hiding anymore, wasn't pretending to be something she wasn't. She was exactly what she appeared to be. A human from Earth. A Deathworld species who had somehow managed to combine the survival instincts of an apex predator with the curiosity and cooperation that led to civilization. The galaxy had assumed humans were fragile because they'd misread the data. They'd seen stable atmosphere and diverse ecosystem, and hadn't bothered to read the fine print about the predators, the diseases, the weather, the 1,000 different ways Earth tried to kill anything living on it. They'd thought she was a student who needed protection. They hadn't realized she was already more dangerous than most species on the station, not despite her education, but because of what she'd learned surviving on a planet that made every day a challenge. But here was the thing that the galactic community was slowly learning. Humans weren't dangerous because they were violent or aggressive. They were dangerous because they were adaptable, persistent, and creative. They were survivors who had decided that survival wasn't enough and reached for the stars anyway. Kira made it back to her quarters to find Zixtara reorganizing their shared space again, because Palaxians apparently found comfort in routine adjustments. "Good news," Kira announced. "I passed everything. We're both returning next semester." "Excellent," Zixtara said, feathers ruffling with what Kira had learned to recognize as pleasure. "I've been planning our study schedule. We're taking advanced stellar biology together, and I've coordinated our lab times to ensure optimal learning conditions." "You're terrifying in your own way," Kira said affectionately. "I'm from a Class 5 world," Zixtara said primly. "We compensate for our lack of physical intimidation with superior organizational skills." Kira laughed and collapsed onto her sleeping platform, which creaked ominously because it still wasn't really rated for Deathworld species, but functioned adequately. "Do you think things will be calmer next semester?" "Absolutely not," Zixtara said. "Ven is already planning his research project, which apparently involves testing human capabilities in various scenarios. Rixtal mentioned something about zero-G sports, and I heard the Dean is considering opening enrollment to more Deathworld species now that they've updated the protocols. So, chaos, but organized chaos. The best kind," Zixtara agreed. Kira stared at the ceiling of her quarters, thinking about the semester that had passed and the ones ahead. She'd come to the academy expecting to learn about xenobiology, stellar mechanics, and the fundamental nature of the universe. She'd gotten all that, plus lessons in diplomacy, crisis management, and the infinite ways that intelligent species could misunderstand each other and still find common ground. She'd also learned that being different wasn't the same as being wrong. That capabilities that seemed threatening could be assets when applied correctly. That a species shaped by a death world could still choose cooperation over conflict, even when conflict would be easier. The Intersolar Academy had admitted a student from Earth, expecting a fragile being who needed protection. What they'd gotten instead was a demonstration that survival instincts and academic excellence weren't mutually exclusive. That Deathworld species could thrive in civilized spaces without sacrificing what made them effective survivors. They'd thought she was just another student. They hadn't known she was born on a Deathworld, shaped by millions of years of evolution in an environment that demanded excellence or extinction. But now they knew. And rather than fear, they'd responded with curiosity, acceptance, and the slow realization that maybe the galaxy's understanding of strength and danger needed updating. Kira smiled at the ceiling and closed her eyes. Next semester would bring new challenges, new opportunities to accidentally break things, new chances to prove that humans belonged among the stars, not despite their origin, but because of it. The galaxy had accepted humans as members of the interstellar community. Now it was learning what that actually meant. And if the reactions so far were any indication, it was going to be an interesting journey. After all, Earth hadn't trained humans to be gentle. It had trained them to survive, adapt, and overcome. The fact that they'd chosen to do all that while also being curious, cooperative, and occasionally ridiculous was just humanity being itself. And the galaxy, for better or worse, would just have to adjust. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.